the alter ego that many artists use. But this isn't an unconscious split, it's a conscious one. Plus, your old ego can directly control who or what you are. It's like your shadow, while you're unconscious, is now deciding where you go and what you do through your subconscious actions. And you wouldn't mind. Why would you? Does your shadow complain to you otherwise? There could even be an increase in direct spin-offs. For some people, it even goes so far that when their alter ego takes over, they can't even remember what they experienced while in it. That would no longer be a direct split, but a direct separation of your true self. In our ego shadow example, this would be the lack of any light source and the immersion in complete darkness or unconsciousness. Of course, these are just extreme cases, because losing your true self, your inner light, your soul, or your divine grace, or whatever you want to call it, carries great risks. Fortunately, it's not so easy to lose them. So don't be afraid. But before we delve further into extreme cases, I'd prefer to come back to them when the time is right. Before that, let's discuss another phenomenon. Here, the ego uses the masks and roles that daily life unconsciously imposes on us to keep us in our subconscious habitual pathways and patterns. The nagging mother, the overly strict father, the annoying siblings, the constantly stressed co-worker, the boss who blocks everything, the ever-trumping boyfriend, the partner who's always lacking, or the ego-driven society. Everyone wears their masks and plays their part to hide their true intentions. Masks that actors wear, consciously fulfilling the roles imposed by the conscious ego. But who do we live for, and in what kind of theater, when most of these people are miserable in the roles and with the masks they have to wear? Why then continue to wear these masks or play these roles to the end? Here one can clearly see that one has a personality, but we are not this personality either. Because on any given day, you could decide to immediately change something about yourself. And you could thus influence your current habits, views, character traits, or your level of identification. So what happened to authenticity and sincerity? We live in a time when speaking the truth feels like a desperate cry in the middle of the vast ocean, unheard by anyone. But I assure you, you will be heard. And if you bring up their old ego role to our artist friends, the answer goes like this: that was all just for show. When they went home in the evening, they could shed that personality as well. But what if that's not the case? What if you have consciously separated from the ego, but your ego hasn't subconsciously separated from you? What if the ego is still there subconsciously, lurking and waiting? Now we have an understanding of what the ego is and what it does. It is a split off of our genuine personality created unconsciously and subconsciously holds our true selves captive with this separation. Now let's look at how the ego can act subconsciously, and how the ego can keep our true selves trapped in a subconscious separation. In doing this, the ego uses one of the 7 hermetic laws from quantum physics, the law of polarity duality. I recommend anyone who doesn't know the hermetic laws to deal with them immediately. There's another name for them: the laws from a spiritual point of view, the 7 universal laws. However, these overlap in many ways. These 2 sets of laws are primarily knowledge. This information should be known to everyone. Through this law of duality, a true self is subconsciously held captive by the ego in this duality. You can think of it as the superposition that exists in all of us getting into a kind of quantum entanglement through duality. Many possible opportunities are denied or not even shown. Well, here you would have a clear advantage if you were already familiar with the terminology and understanding from quantum physics. But don't worry, you can catch up on everything. That's what I did. But what is polarity duality? Duality is the presence of two mostly opposing views of things. To make it more understandable for our example in the video, it is the evaluation and judgment of good-evil, true-false, light-dark, etc. This evaluation tells the ego which direction to take. Whether it's keeping you down more through negative aspects that you're not enough, there are better ones, you don't deserve it. Or it keeps you away from your true self, letting you look for the answers with positive aspects wherever they can't be found. In a fake, superficial love, or in a family that doesn't accept you, or in a company that doesn't value you for who you are. While the ego is doing all of this, it completely ignores your true self and its needs. It's also not possible to think two thoughts at the same time. Or is it? So, who thinks of you when the ego only thinks about itself? Try to imagine the concept of duality as a sort of medal, where the ego can only ever look at one of the two sides of the medal, but never the whole medal. Or could you answer me this question? If you tried to fail in the beginning, but you succeeded in the end, did you fail or did you succeed? This question is paradoxical, and that's what the ego loves, to maintain the upper hand through confusion. If we looked at this question without duality, it wouldn't matter whether one succeeded or failed. Because that would already be the first unconscious evaluation, namely, that our existence depends on external assessments, which we need to judge. Every victory or defeat has justified our existence and can help us move forward in our lives. However, if we make our inner experiences dependent on external influences and circumstances, we falsify our individual, true experience of ourselves. Or we may have already decided at the beginning that we want to fail or that we want to make it. This too would already be unconsciously dualistic thinking, because it once again gives the whole thing a framework, value, and direction. Instead of being in the here and now, we're already thinking about how and when to trade something, rather than being as perfect as this moment makes it out to be, being fully aware in the here and now. And perhaps the participants would have received, understood, or even learned something much more valuable than their 50-second victory or their 18th defeat. But their minds have become fixated on these numbers. They find it hard to let go of this thought process, or they don't yet know how to loosen this fixation. Unfortunately, I also can't answer the previously mentioned question with a reasonable and satisfactory answer, except maybe with, if this is your issue with this question, then unfortunately, you don't yet see the real flaw of the problem. But how can it be that evaluation and judgment have such a strong hold on us subconsciously? Let's take a look at it. What is evaluation and judgment? It's nothing more than evaluated experiences. Therefore, these are memories stored in the subconscious, conditioning old patterns, reproaches, accusations, constantly repeating mistakes, or whatever else is still holding you at your current level of identification. The ego clings to this unconscious level of identification with these experiences valued by the subconscious mind, so that you don't consciously find your true self. It does this by letting you aimlessly wander in your own maze of emotions unconsciously. It lets you run the deceptive illusions in front of your eyes in a melancholic and painful manner over and over again. Or it reminds you that you have been raised and conditioned to only go as far as you've been taught and not a step further. It traps you in moments when you get entangled in the old patterns, or because you haven't yet learned to let go and don't know how it's done. See the issue of success and defeat, the accusations and charges being tossed back and forth as if you were playing tennis or ping pong. With every accusation and reproach that is uttered, the burden of the globe hums with a little more weight. Likewise, the constantly recurring errors that make you doubt your abilities, your desires, or even your very identity, along with countless other subconsciously assessed experiences with which the ego aspires to keep you ensnared in a primordial garden of emotions on this unconscious level of self-identification. I perpetually presumed that we were all autonomous beings, but I have since been proven mistaken. Some individuals are so engrossed within the confines of their ego that it consumes them. And during this unconscious hostile takeover of your true self, the ego employs cunning and guile. Allow me to provide an illustration of what I mean by this unconscious hostile takeover of the ego. Are you familiar with this? When you're arguing with a loved one and realize that you've crossed the line yet again and keep going regardless. Because in that unconscious moment, the ego has to bring out the old accusations, judged by the subconscious, charges, stuck patterns, bad past events or similar things, to prevent your true self from consciously expressing itself in this situation. Lots of subconscious judged experiences that can practically silence your true self. Old unconscious biological processes that trap you as if in an open cage of the subconscious. Until this whole drama is finally over, and then you feel really terrible or even embarrassed because this was not truly what you intended from the argument. Does that sound familiar to anyone? So this voice, constantly nagging, sometimes loud and disruptive, sometimes whispering, but never peaceful. That's the ego. And this ever-constant calm voice deep within you, screaming out to you in such situations. Enough. Recognize what's happening right now. Remember yourself. That is your true self. The self which has not yet conscientiously learned to oppose ego and also set boundaries. Now, with the knowledge that you have so far, decide for yourselves, how many of these unconscious ego-occupied creatures do you know? And as already mentioned, the ego is very cunning and very tricky and can take on many faces. Suddenly, in the next moment, after the argument, the ego pushes the victim role to you and makes you wear the mask of fear and despair. You are so weak, unable to defend, protect, or help yourself. So after the theater-worthy argument, the ego is now trying to guide you unconsciously with a theater-worthy drama in a direction which leads away from your true self. True self-knowledge is like poison for the ego. That's why the ego wants to keep you lost in the maze, playing its ego game. Instead of seeking flaws in self-knowledge, it restrains you with subconscious sentences like that you're worthless alone and others can see it, that you're a bad person, so nobody wants you, or that you're never able to change on your own. But if you were to realize consciously that you don't need this unconscious ego, but it needs you more than you need it, you would also realize that you could help yourself, that you're not too weak to defend yourself or change something. Because if you would listen to yourself, you'd realize that you're strong enough. I know that. Your ego does too, but you don't yet. It's precisely these negatively evaluated experiences, emotions, that the ego likes to exploit because it requires very little effort to awaken subconscious negative emotions and experiences. For instance, the fear that you are not enough, that you have no value, that you're not doing anything right, that you're not wanted, or even worse. But the truth is that you have that value. However, if you were to acknowledge this value, this part of the ego would lose its power.